karavavai tejasvinavati tamastu ma vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are reading from the complete works of Swami Abhedananada, and these are his reminiscences of the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. So many of them you'll find in the Gospel, but these are his personal reminiscences rather than just M's. So we get some extra highlights, which is kind of fun. Rites and ceremonies. People of this age care for the essence of everything. They will accept the essential of religion and not its non-essentials, that is, the rituals, ceremonies, dogmas, and creeds. Although in a grain of paddy the germ is considered the only necessary thing for germination and growth, while the husk or chaff is considered to be of no importance, still, if the husked grain be put into the ground, it will not sprout up and grow into a plant and produce rice. To get a crop, one must need sow the grain with the husk on. But if one wants to get at the kernel itself, he must remove the husk of the grain. So rites and ceremonies are necessary for the growth and perpetuation of a religion. They are the receptacles that contain the kernel of truth, and consequently, every person must perform them before reaching the central truth. Yeah, I think that is very important that we remember when we're doing various ceremonies. So often, people really don't take the time to know the significance of the rite and the ritual and the ceremony, but you're just supposed to go to church or temple or synagogue and you do these various rites and rituals, but nobody ever explains to you why. And largely because you've done them since you were a little kid when you were too young to understand the explanation, and then nobody ever gets around to explaining it. So it really is important for us to all take the time to understand the rites and rituals. And of course, today is Good Friday, which is the essence of the sacraments of the Christian tradition, and to understand that it's the sacrifice of Jesus and the consumption of his essence in the rites of the sacrament, that you are partaking of a ritual that goes back a couple of thousands of years, and becoming one with that dimension of the spirituality. And we have the same thing in our spiritual traditions. We need to, in our own spiritual tradition in Vedanta, when we're doing arati, we need to remember that we're offering all our actions back to the deity in the form of the five elements. So those kinds of things I think are important. Honor spirit and form, both sentimental within and symbol without. The pearl oyster that contains the precious pearl is in itself of very little value, but it is essential for the growth of the pearl. The shell itself may prove to be of no use to the man who gets the pearl. So ceremonies and rites may not be necessary for him who has attained the higher truth, God. Devotional practices are necessary only so long as tears of ecstasy do not flow at hearing the name of Hari. He needs no devotional practices whose heart is moved to tears at the mere mention of the name. The soul reincarnates in a body of which it was thinking just before its last departure from this world. Devotional practices may, therefore, be seen to be very necessary. When by constant practice no worldly ideas arise in the mind, then the God idea alone fills the soul and does not leave it even when on the brink of eternity. What is the difference among the Sattvika, the Rajasika, and the Tamasika ways of worship? Answer. The man who worships from the depth of his heart without pomp and vanity and without the idea of show, that is the Sattvika worshiper. The man who decorates his house, has music and dance, and makes costly preparations for a rich feast of fruits and sweetmeats is celebrating the worship of the deity in a Rajasic manner. The man who emulates hundreds of innocent goats and sheep at the altar, has dishes of meat and wine, and becomes absorbed in dancing and singing, is the Tamasika worshiper. That refers to, of course, the three gunas, the Sattva guna, the Raja guna, and the Tamasic guna. The Tamasic guna is the guna which hides or conceals and has the characteristics of darkness and hidden and obscured. And Rajasika is activity, and Sattvika is purity and the guna that reveals the true nature of what's going on. Sects is the next section. Question: is it good to create sects? Here is a pun. Oh, and then there's in parentheses the original word was dal, and there's a pun on the word dal, which means both sect as well as the rank growth on the surface of a stagnant pool. The dal cannot grow in a current of water. It grows only in the stagnant water on small pools. He whose heart longs for the deity has no time for anything else. He who looks for fame and honor forms sects, or dal, or sampradaya. Dala, sedge, does not grow in large and pure water tanks, but in all stagnant and miasmic pools. Similarly, dala, schism, does not take place in a party whose adherents are guided by pure, broad, and unselfish motives, but it takes firm root in a party whose advocates are given to selfishness, insincerity, and bigotry. There's a parenthetical remark. Dala in Bengali means both sedge and schism. So we got another pun. Some years ago, when the Hindus and the Brahmos were preaching their respective religions with true earnestness and great zeal, someone asked Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna his opinion about the two parties, on which he replied, quote, "I see that my Divine Mother is getting her work done through both the parties," unquote. Question: there are various sects among the Hindus. Which sect or creed should we adopt? Answer: Parvati once asked Mahadeva, "O Lord, what is the root of the eternal, everlasting, all-embracing bliss?" To her, Mahadeva replied, "The root is faith." So the peculiarities of creed and sects matter little or nothing. Let everyone perform with faith the devotion and the duties of his own creed. Questioned by a pious devotee as to the difference between Hinduism and Brahmoism, the Bhagavan said, quote, "It is like the difference between the single note of music and the whole music. The Brahmo religion is content with the single note of the Brahman, while Hindu religion consists of several notes, producing a sweet melodious harmony." Question: why do religions degenerate? Why do religions degenerate? Answer: the rainwater is pure, but becomes soiled on earth according to the medium it passes through. If the roof and the pipes be dirty, the water discharged through them must also be dirty. Easy to talk religion, difficult to act. That's the next section. It is easy to utter do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, or sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni by mouth, but not so easy to sing or play them on any instrument. So it is easy to talk religion, but it is difficult to act religion. My music teacher told me the other day that he ran into somebody who played the organ at a church, and instead of playing from a hymn book, he had everything written out in do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. He said, "Oh, I never learned to read music. I just use solfege." Well, how you would do that? It seems impossible. But anyway, common men talk bagfuls of religion, but act not a grain of it, while the wise man speaks little, but his whole life is a religion acted out. What you wish others to do, do yourself. Next section is man born with two tendencies. Man is born in this world with two tendencies, the vidya tendency, or tendency towards liberation, and the avidya tendency, or tendency towards world and bondage. When born, both tendencies are in equilibrium like the scales of a balance. The world soon places its enjoyments and pleasures in one of the scales, and the spirit and its attractions on the other. And if the intellect chooses the world, the worldly scale becomes heavy and gravitates towards the earth. But if it chooses the spirit, the spiritual scale gravitates towards God. Seeing the water pass glittering through a network of bamboo sticks, the small fry enter into it with great pleasure. And having once entered, they cannot get out. Is that a kind of fish, you suppose? The small fry. It says small fry. Anyway, they cannot get out and are caught. Similarly, foolish people enter into the world allured by its false glitter, but as it is easier to enter the net than to get out of it, so it is easier to enter the world than to renounce it after having once entered it. Direct young hearts toward God. That's the next section. The tender bamboo can be easily bent, but the full-grown bamboo breaks when attempt is made to bend it. It is easy to bend young hearts toward God, but the heart of the old escapes the hold when so drawn. A ripe mango may be offered to God or to a sage, or may be used for other purposes. But if it be once picked into by a crow, it becomes unfit for all use. It can neither be offered to the deity nor given to a Brahmin in charity, nor should it be eaten by anyone. Similarly, boys and girls should be dedicated to the service of God when their hearts are pure, and when the impurity of worldly desires has not tainted them. Let once worldly desires enter into their minds, or let the demon of sensual pleasures cast his baneful shadow over them. It is then very difficult to make them tread the path of virtue. Well, it's just like habits. Things become habits, and habits aren't that easy to break. And so it's best not to form the bad habit in the first place. The newborn calf looks very lively, blithe, and merry. It jumps and runs all day long, and only stops to suck the sweet milk from its dam, it says. I assume that means the mother. Maybe dame? I don't know. Some very, very Indian terms in here that I'm not so familiar with. But no sooner is the rope placed around its neck than it begins to pine away gradually, and, far from being merry, wears a dejected and sorry appearance, and gets almost reduced to a skeleton. So long as a boy has no concern with the affairs of the world, he is as merry as the day is long. But when he once feels the weight of responsibilities of a man of family by binding himself in time to the world by the indissoluble tie of wedlock, then he no longer appears jolly, but wears the look of dejection, care, and anxiety, and is seen to lose the glow of health from his cheeks, while wrinkles gradually make their appearance on the forehead. Blessed is he that remains a boy throughout his life, free as the morning air, fresh as a newly blown flower, and pure as a dewdrop. Question: why do you love? Let's see, what are we doing here? Why do you love the young people? Because they possess the whole of their minds. One half the mind of married people goes to the spouse. When a child is born, it takes away 1/4, and the remaining 1/4 is scattered over relatives, friends, business, name, food, clothes, etc. Therefore, the young mind can easily acquire God. The parrot cannot be taught to sing if it becomes old and the membrane of its throat becomes hardened. It must be taught before the collar line appears and while it is young. So in old age it is difficult for the mind to be fixed on God. It can be easily done in youth. The worldly find no opportunity to practice devotion. A person said, "When my boy Harish grows up, I will get him married and give him the charge of the family. I shall renounce the world and begin to practice yoga." At this, the Bhagavan said, "You will never find any opportunity to practice yoga, devotion. You will say afterwards, 'Harish and Girish are very much attached to me. They do not like to leave my company as yet.' Then you will desire, perhaps, to let Harish have a son, and let me see that son married. Thus there will be no end of your desires." The evil spirit is exercised by throwing magnetized mustard seeds on the patient. I don't know how you magnetize a mustard seed. But if the spirit has entered into the seed itself, how can such seed remove the evil spirit? If the mind with which thou art to contemplate the deity be attached to the vicious thoughts of the world, how canst thou expect to do successfully thy religious devotions with such a corrupt instrument? Of course, we must remember, too, that these are things that Swami Abhedananada remembers Sri Ramakrishna saying. So these would be times when perhaps more of his future monastic disciples were present, as opposed to a larger group of people. So we're seeing that kind of emphasis here. Let's see. Worldly men unchanged by divine grace. When the Malaya breeze blows, all trees having stamina in them become converted into sandalwood trees. But those which have no stamina remain unchanged as before, like bamboo, plantain, palm tree, etc. So, when divine grace descends, people have the germs of piety, people having the germs of piety and goodness in them are changed at once into holy beings and are filled with the divinity. But worthless and worldly people remain as before. Yeah, so that's a common Hindu idea that there's a special breeze, the Malaya breeze, and when it blows over certain trees, they're converted into sandalwood trees, which are very fragrant and special. Flies sit at all times on the sweetmeats kept exposed for sale in the shop of a confectioner. But no sooner does a sweeper pass by with a basket full of filth than the flies leave the sweetmeats and sit upon the filth basket. But the honeybee never sits on filthy objects. and always drinks honey from the flowers. The worldly people are like flies. At times they get a momentary taste of the divine sweetness, but their natural tendency for filth soon brings them back to the dunghill of the world. The good person, on the other hand, is always absorbed in the beatific contemplation of divine beauty. The worldly person is like a worm that always lives and dies in filth and has no idea of higher things. The good person of the world is like the fly that sits now in the filth and now in the sweet, while the free soul of a yogin is like the bee that always drinks the honey of God's holy presence and nothing else. The person immersed in worldliness cannot attain the divine knowledge. He cannot see God. Does the muddy water ever reflect the sun or any surrounding object? As the troubled surface of rolling water does not reflect the full moon properly, but in broken images, so the mind that is disturbed by worldly desires and passions does not fully reflect the light of God. I use that analogy a lot when I'm explaining what meditation is to people in like a interfaith or world religions class, that it's like calming the waves of the mind so that it's like a swimming pool. If everybody's been jumping into the pool, if there's something at the bottom of the pool, you can't see what it is, or even if it's there. So if you've lost something at the bottom of the pool, you have to ask everybody to get out of the pool and let all the waves settle down. Then you can, at first, as it starts to get fairly quiet, you can sort of see an image, but it's kind of wavy and you might be able to kind of make out what it is. But when it's completely still, then you can clearly see what's at the bottom of the pool. And our mind is like that. At the bottom of our mind, you could say, or the depth of our soul, is the divine. And that's what we're after during meditation. Soft clay admits of forms, but the burnt clay does not. So those whose hearts are consumed with the fire of worldly desires cannot be impressed with higher ideas. The cries of the jackals are alike. The teachings of all the wise people of the world are essentially one and the same. The vultures soar high up in the air, but all the time they are looking down into the charnel pits in search of putrid carcasses. So the book-read pundits speak glibly and volubly about divine knowledge, but it is all mere talk, for all the while their mind is thinking about how to get money, respect, power, etc., the vain guerdon of their learning. A lot of words I don't know. All right. A worldly man may be endowed with intellect as great as that of Janaka, but take as much pains and troubles as a yogin and make as great sacrifices as an ascetic. But all these he makes and does not for God, but for worldliness, honor, and wealth. Of all the birds of the air, the crow is considered to be the wisest, and he thinks himself so too. He never falls into a snare. He flies off at the slightest approach of danger and steals food with the greatest dexterity. But all this wisdom can supply him with no better living than filth and foul matter. This is the result of his having the wisdom of the pettifogger. I don't know what a pettifogger is either. Doesn't sound good though. Lots of archaic English terms here. Oh my, let's see. Salvation for worldly minded in renunciation. Question: what state of mind being attained to can the worldly minded get salvation? Answer: if by the grace of God the quick spirit of renunciation comes to one Then one can get rid of the attachment to lust and wealth, and then only is one free from all worldly bondages. When paper is moistened with oil, it cannot be written upon. So the soul, spoiled by the oil of sense enjoyments, is unfit for spiritual devotion. But just as oiled paper, when overlaid with chalk, can be written upon, so when the soul is chalked over with renunciation, it again becomes fit for spiritual progress. There are lots of interesting analogies that you're finding here that we don't find in the Gospel or in the Great Master or any other place. The key to open that room where God is works in a curious, contrary way. To reach God, you have to renounce the world. This world is like a stage where people perform many parts under various disguises. They do not like to take off the mask unless they have played for some time. Let them play for a while, and then they will leave off the mask of their own accord. Whatever gives enjoyment in this world contains a bit of divine happiness in it. The difference between the two is between treacle and refined candy. I think treacle is a kind of molasses, as I remember. The world and God, how is it possible to harmonize both? Look to the carpenter's wife, how diversely busy she is. With one hand she is stirring the flattened rice in a mortar, a wooden husking and rice flattening machine. With the other she is holding the child to her breast and suckling it, and at the same time bargaining with the purchaser about the chira, which is the flattened rice. Thus, though manifold are her operations, her mind is fixed on the one idea that the pestle of the denki shall not fall on her hand and bruise it. Be in the world, but always remember the Lord, and never go astray from his path. As the street minstrel with one hand plays upon the guitar and with the other strikes a drum, all the while chanting a song, so, O thou world-bound soul, perform all thy worldly duties with thy hands, but never forget to repeat and glorify the name of the Lord with thy heart. As persons living in a house infested by venomous snakes are always alert and cautious, so should people living in the world be always on their guard against the allurements of lust and greed. How to conquer passions? On being asked when enemies, lust, anger, etc. can be vanquished, the Bhagavan replied, so long as these passions are directed toward the world and its objects, they are enemies. But when they are directed towards the deity, they become the best friends of people, for they take him to the Godhead. Lust for worldly things can be changed to lust for God. The anger you feel toward your fellow creatures must be directed toward God for not manifesting himself to you, and so on with all your passions. The passions should not be eradicated, but educated. Kind of sounds like martial arts, where you use the strength of the enemy against them. You know. Saving power of divine wisdom. The snake is very venomous. It bites when anyone approaches to catch it. But the person who has learnt the act of snake charming not only can catch a snake, but carries about several of them hanging around his neck and arms, like so many ornaments. Yes, certainly we saw that in the image of Shiva at Shivaratri. Similarly, he who has acquired spiritual knowledge can never be polluted by lust and greed. Unshod and with bare feet, who will venture to walk upon thorns and sharp stones? Shod with divine wisdom, what thorns or sharp stones can harm you? If you first smear the palms of your hands with oil and break open the jackfruit, the sticky, milky exudation of the fruit will not stick to the hands and does not trouble you. So if you first fortify yourself with the true knowledge of the universal self, and then live in the midst of gold and lust, they will not affect you. They will affect you in no way. Fastening in thy garment the knowledge of Advaita, oneness or non-duality, do whatever thou wishest. Good and evil cannot bind him who has realized the oneness of the nature and of nature, the self, and Brahman. I don't think I've ever had to break open a jackfruit. That'll be an interesting experience. We should try it sometimes. Right. I think I've actually seen one in the store.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah, they're enormous. They're like this with little
$20.
Yeah, spikes all over it. First seek God, then the world. To someone, the Bhagavan said, "Well now, you have come to seek God when you have spent the greater part of your life in the world. Had you entered the world after realizing God, what peace and joy you would have found. First gain God and then gain wealth, but do not do the contrary. If after acquiring spirituality you lead a worldly life, then you will never lose your peace of mind." As a boy holding on to a post or a pillar gyrates around it with headlong speed without fear of falling, so, fixing thy hold to God, perform thy worldly duties, and thou shalt be free from all dangers. There was a song in the gospel of God is my pole star. Similar, you're not holding on to the pole star, but you're using it as a central guide. As a boy, we just read that. Do not let worldly thoughts and anxieties disturb your mind. Do everything that is necessary in its proper time, and let your mind be always fixed on God. As an unchaste person busily engages in household affairs, all the while thinking of her secret lover, even so, a man of the world, do thou round of worldly duties, but fix thy heart always on the Lord. Let's see. Avoid wicked association. It is true that God is even in the tiger, but we must not go out and face the animal. So it is true that God dwells even in the most wicked, but it is not right that we should associate with the wicked. Visit not miracle workers. They are wanderers from the path of truth. Their minds have become entangled in the meshes of psychic powers which lie in the way of pilgrims towards Brahman as temptations. Beware of these powers and desire them not. All water is brooded over by Narayana, Supreme Spirit. But every kind of water is not fit to drink. Similarly, though it is true that the Almighty dwells in every place, yet every place is not fit to be visited by a person. As one kind of water may be used for washing our feet, another may serve the purpose of ablution, and others may be drunk, while others again may not be touched at all. So there are different kinds of places. We may approach some, we may enter into the inside of others, while others we must avoid even at a distance. And of course, this whole idea of pilgrimage and spiritual association, places pick up the energy of the people that hang around them. So I know that's why a lot of people go to the library to study, because everybody is studying in the library. So in college, people found it easier to study at the library than they did, say, in the common room of the dorm or something like that. And so similarly, we find it easier to meditate and to pray if we go to a temple or a church or a synagogue, because that's what people tend to do, hopefully, in those places. And so it's easier to put your own mind in that state. Whereas if you went to a movie theater, even if it was empty, it just doesn't have the same vibe to it, and it just is more difficult to put your mind in that place. A young plant should be always protected by a fence from the mischief of goats and cows and little urchins. But when once it becomes a big tree, a flock of goats or a herd of cows may find shelter under its spreading boughs and fill their stomachs with its leaves. So when you have but little faith within yourself, you should protect it from the evil influences of bad company and worldliness. But once you grow strong in faith, no worldliness or evil inclinations will dare approach your holy presence, and many who are wicked will become godly through your holy contact. And that's so important, especially if you've moved into a new setting. I mean, because I do work at USC and so forth, and so when the students, they've left their homes and they've moved into a dorm or an apartment house, a student thing, it's important to keep good associations and to not yield to peer pressure, stick to your own ideals. Don't think that you have to fit in and become like other people. Unless those other people happen to be spiritual. Then by all means, try to fit in. Neophytes should seek solitude and stillness. Once some Brahmo boys told me that they followed Janaka's example. They lived in this world quite unattached to it. I said to them that it was easy to say that, but it was a different matter to be Janaka. It is so hard to move among worldly affairs without being contaminated. What terrible austerities did Janaka practice at the outset? But I do not advise you to go through similar hardships. But what I do want you to do is to practice some devotion and to live alone for a time in some quiet place. Enter into the world after gaining jnana and bhakti for yourselves. The best curd is formed when milk is left alone to stand quite still. The shaking or changing of the pot spoils it. Janaka was unattached. Hence, one of his epithets applied to him was the videhi, literally bodiless. He led the life of a jivan mukta, literally free though alive in the body. The annihilation of the body idea is exceedingly difficult to accomplish. Truly, Janaka was a great hero. He handled with ease the two swords, the one of jnana and the other of karma. If you have a mind to live unattached from the world, you should first practice devotion in solitude for some time, say a year or 6 months, or a month, or at least 12 days. During the period of retirement, you should meditate constantly upon God and pray to Him for divine love. You should revolve in your mind the thought that there is nothing in the world that you may call your own. Those whom you think your own will pass away in no time. God is really your own. He is your all in all. How to obtain Him should be your only concern. Yes, all the things of the world just pass away, and people think, oh, I want to make a name for myself, I want to be remembered. But in the long run, even human history is pretty short. The entire human history is very short compared to the age of the universe. and it all passes away in time. The sun will swell up into a big red giant, and the earth will be incinerated, and there won't be any remembrance of anything at that point. So yeah, put it in perspective. Keep thyself aloof at the time of thy devotion from those who scoff at them, and from those who ridicule piety and the pious. Keep thine own sentiments and faith to thyself. Do not talk about them abroad. Otherwise thou wilt be a great loser. If you wash well the body of an elephant and let him at large, he is sure to get himself dirtied in no time. But if after washing him you tie him down to his own room, he will remain clean. I didn't know elephants had rooms. Must be a big room. So, if by the good influences of holy men you once become pure in spirit, and then allow yourself to mix freely with worldly men, you are sure to lose that purity soon. But if you keep your mind fixed on God, you will never more get spoiled in spirit. The pure in heart see God. The soiled mirror never reflects the rays of the sun, and the impure and unclean in heart, who are subject to Maya, never perceive the glory of the Lord. But the pure in heart see the Lord as the clear mirror reflects the sun. Be holy then. As a person standing on the bank of a deep well is always afraid and watchful lest of falling into it, so should a person living in the world always be on the guard against temptations. One who has once fallen into the well of temptations can hardly come out of it pure and stainless. The person who, living in the midst of the temptations of the world, attains perfection is the true hero. The newborn calf feels unsteady and tumbles down scores of times before it learns to stand steady. So in the path of devotion, the foot slips are many and frequent before success is finally achieved. And I used to tell my math students not to be afraid of making mistakes. If you just sit there and think you don't know what to do, you won't get anywhere. Try something. Try anything to see if you can solve the problem. And might not work. Then you try something else, and maybe that won't work. Or maybe another idea will come to you as you're trying one method. But if you just sit there and think, this is too hard, I can't do anything, then nothing happens. So never be afraid of trying. And so you make a mistake, then you just try again. The truly religious person is one who does not commit any sin even when alone, because God sees that person, though no person may see him. He who can resist the temptations of lust and gold in a lonely place, unobserved by any person, through the fear that God sees him, and who through such fear does not even think an evil thought, is truly a religious person. But he who practices religion for the sake of show, and through the fear of public opinion, has no religion in him. Sin, like quicksilver, that refers to mercury, can never be concealed. I don't quite get that. I wonder what they mean. I thought quicksilver referred to mercury. Anyway, okay. He is truly a pious man who is dead even in this life, whose passions and desires have been destroyed as in a dead body. Sugar and sand may be mixed together, but the ant rejects the sand and goes off with the sugar grain. So a pious person sifts the good from the bad. It is the nature of the winnowing basket to reject the bad and keep the good. Even such is the case with pious people. When does the attraction of sensual and worldly pleasures die away? In God, who is indivisible, ever-existing bliss, there is a consolidation of all happiness and of all pleasures. Those who enjoy him can find no attraction in the pleasures of the world. When the tail of the tadpole drops off, it can live both in water and on land. When the trail of ignorance drops off, a person becomes free and can live both in God and in the world equally well. Ascetics. Those who live in the world and try to find salvation are like soldiers that fight protected by the breastwork of a fort, while the ascetics who renounce the world in search of God are like the soldiers fighting in an open field. To fight from within the fort is more convenient and safer than to fight in the open field. Of the grains of paddy which are fried in a frying pan, those few which leap out of the pan and burst outside are the best fried, being without the least mark of any tinge. Every one of even the properly fried grains in the pan itself is sure to have at least a small charred mark of a burn. So of all good devotees, the few who altogether give up the world and go out of it are perfect without any spot, while even the best devotees who are in the world must have at least some spot of imperfection in their character. I feel like I've turned 2 pages, but nope, just one. All right. Spiritual gain depends on heart. The spiritual gain of a person depends upon his sentiments and ideas. Proceeds from his heart and not from his visible actions. 2 friends, while strolling about, happened to pass by a place where the Bhagavatam, the word of God, was being preached. One of them said, "Brother, let us go there for a while and hear the good words spoken." The other replied, "No, friend, what is the use of hearing the Bhagavatam? Let us spend our time in yonder public house in the amusement and pleasure." The first one did not consent to this. He went to the place where the Bhagavatam was being read and began to hear it. The other went to the public house, but did not find the pleasure that he had anticipated there, and was thinking all the while, "Alas me, why have I come here? How happy is my friend, hearing all the while the sacred life and deeds of Hari, the Lord." Thus he meditated on Hari even though in a public house. The other man who was hearing the Bhagavatam also did not find pleasure in it. Sitting there, he began to blame himself, saying, "Alas, why did I not accompany my friend to the public house? What a great pleasure he must be enjoying at this time there. Boy, it's always green on the other side of the hill, right?" Yeah. The result was that he who was sitting there where the Bhagavatam was being preached meditated on the pleasures of the public house, and acquired the fruit of the sin of going to the public house because of his bad thoughts, while the man who had gone to the public house acquired the merits of hearing the Bhagavatam because of his good heart. The power of mind and thought. It is the mind that makes one wise or ignorant, bound or emancipated. One is holy because of his mind. One is wicked because of his mind. One is a sinner because of his mind. And it is the mind that makes one virtuous. So he whose mind is always fixed on God requires no other practice, devotion, or spiritual exercises. The faith healers of India order their patients to repeat with full conviction the words, quote, "There is no illness in me, and there is no illness at all," unquote. The patient repeats it and thus mentally denying the illness goes off. So, if you think yourself mortally weak, sinful, and without goodness, you will really find yourself to be so in time. Know and believe that you are of immense power, and the power will come to you at last. That was a frequent message of Vivekananda. And of course, at the time then both of these men, Vivekananda and Abhedananada, were preaching, there was a predominance of Christian thought of emphasizing this sin of mankind, that all people were sinners. And they thought this was a bad affirmation, you could say. It was like people were affirming exactly the opposite of what they wanted. They were probably more aligned to the Christian Science idea, as they're saying no illness in you. Similarly, there's divinity in you and goodness in you. And the more you reaffirm that idea, the more you will be able to manifest those qualities. So we tend to bring out whatever it is we think about. And now that I think of it, that's kind of what Luther Burbank and George Washington Carver did with plants. They would think that the plants were going to give them something unique, something new, something useful. And that's what their hybrids gave them. So even doing this on a conscious level of projecting those ideas on plant life has those kinds of effects. And I think that's the mark of a good teacher, too, to always have confidence in the students that you can do this. Might seem difficult, we may have some struggles, but you can do this, and we will get through all these struggles. Certainly when I was a teacher in school, that's what I did. I just took it for granted that somehow or other each of these students could do this work, and we were going to do our best to help them get it done. Not that it always happened, but hopefully more often than not it did. Kind of shifts the equilibrium towards that way. Many, with a show of humility, say, "I am like a low worm groveling in the dust," thus always thinking themselves worms, in times have become weak in spirit like worms. Let not despondency ever enter into thy heart. Despair is the great enemy of progress in one's path. As a person thinketh, so does that person become. A man sitting under the shade of the kalpa vriksha, or wishing tree, wished to be a king, and instantly he was a king. The next moment he wished to have a charming damsel, and the damsel was instantly by his side. The man then thought to himself, if a tiger should come and devour me, and alas, in an instant he was in the jaws of the tiger. God is like the wishing tree. Whosoever in his presence thinks that he is destitute and poor remains as such, but he who believes that the Lord fulfills all his wants receives everything from him. He who thinks that he is a jiva, imperfect and worldly soul, is verily a jiva. He who considers himself to be God verily becomes God. As one thinks, so he becomes. When an elephant is let loose, it goes about uprooting trees and shrubs. But as soon as the driver pricks him on the head with the goad, he becomes quiet. So the mind, when unrestrained, wantoned in the luxuriance of idle thoughts, but becomes at once calm when struck with the goad of right discrimination, viveka. That's probably a good place to end. My favorite math teacher in high school was named Goad. She goaded us to be good students, I guess. She was quite an inspirational person. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure to read for you, and I hope this inspires you to look at the works of Swami Abhedananada on your own, because there are many, many, many inspiring passages. There are, I think, 11 volumes, so you've got a lot to choose from. He lectured in the United States a very long time, and most of his lectures were eventually collected in various books. So you can get books on various topics by Abhedananda, where the lectures on particular topics are all collected in one place, or you can buy the whole set. All right, we'll close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Peace, peace, peace.